Hey y'all, we are up to chapter 5 of Halloween Vibes, the Eternal Rest Bed and Breakfast Paranormal Cozy Mysteries novella. If you have not watched the previous chapters already, you can go back and watch those so you know what's happening and you are ready for this next chapter. Here we go. Chapter 5. I'm thrilled to know Joe's ghost is haunting the square because he might be able to help us get answers, Emily said. But Trevor prompted, raising an eyebrow. But I need to be here to take care of my guests. Trevor grinned. Sage says she anticipated you making the same old excuse, which is why Trish's son Clint is on his way here right now. He'll look after your guests for you. Oh, and Sage told him you'd pay him $50 for it. 50? That's a steep price. The ghost had better make it worth my time and money. Come on, let's wait inside for him to arrive. I could use a cup of coffee. You know where to find the coffee cups, Emily said, opening the door. While Trevor headed for the kitchen, Emily dashed into her bedroom to retrieve her purse and to make sure her long brown hair was neatly pulled back into her usual low ponytail. She had been so groggy earlier that she had hardly paid any attention to her appearance. She gave her dark blue button-down blouse, which had Eternal Rest Bed and Breakfast embroidered in silver on the left breast, a little tug to smooth it out, then headed for the parlor. Trevor was already in there, sitting on the sofa with a half-eaten biscuit in his hand. Emily stood in front of him, crossed her arms, and cleared her throat. When Trevor looked up at her, she did her best to give him a stern look, but she felt the edges of her mouth turning up in a smile. I know, they're for the guests, but Trish makes the best biscuits. Trevor didn't sound remorseful in the slightest. I couldn't help it. Oh, and Clint is here. I saw his car pull in a second ago. Trish's teenage son had helped Emily out before, and she knew she was leaving her guests in good hands. Clint looked like he was still waking up, and Emily suspected Sage's call had roused him from bed. Emily knew if she had been a teenager, asked to crawl out of bed and work at a moment's notice on a Saturday morning, Halloween morning, no less, it would have taken $50 to entice her, too. Trevor offered to drive to the square, and soon he and Emily were making the 10-minute trip into the heart of Oak Hill. The fall leaves made the drive even prettier than usual, and Emily gazed out the window silently, appreciating the view. It wasn't until Trevor said something about Halloween costumes that Emily turned and saw he had another biscuit in his hand. Hey, she admonished, you're supposed to be driving, not eating. She plucked the biscuit out of Trevor's hand and bit into it. He was right that Trish made the best biscuits, and these had been delivered just the night before by Trish herself. Emily's guests always raved about the baked goods they got at breakfast. As Emily and Trevor got closer to downtown Oak Hill, Emily's half-eaten biscuit was forgotten as she took in the scene. The old North Georgia Railroad town went all out for Halloween, and the historic buildings made the perfect backdrop for all the decorations. Garlands resembling dark orange and yellow leaves were strung between the iron lampposts that lined the streets. As Trevor guided the car underneath them, Emily spotted the first of the town's scarecrows. There was one at the base of each lamppost. Every year, local businesses would sponsor a scarecrow, decking it out in the hopes of winning a scarecrow-shaped trophy. The shops and restaurants that surrounded the town square were ready for that day's Halloween revelers and antique shoppers. Oak Hill was a popular destination for tourists looking for antiques and a quaint, small-town atmosphere. At the moment, it was still too early for the crowds of day trippers, so Trevor had no problem finding a parking spot along one side of the square. The first thing Emily noticed when she climbed out of the car was the white gazebo that sat in the middle of the grassy square. It was surrounded by stacks of hay bales, which had dozens of jack-o'-lanterns sitting on top of them. Thick, fake spider webs had been strung between the columns of the gazebo, and orange bunting hung from its roofline. Looks like my front porch, Emily said. At least you have a skeleton, Trevor noted, and real ghosts. Around the gazebo was the pumpkin patch, where people could go to pick out their own pumpkin for carving. Emily guessed there were a few hundred pumpkins spread out underneath the oak trees that dotted the square, and as her eyes roved across the sea of them, she spotted yellow crime scene tape. It cordoned off a section of pumpkins underneath a tree a short distance from the gazebo. "So that's where Joe was murdered," Emily said. She saw police officers walking around the area, one of whom was taking photos. "They took the body away already, so don't worry about seeing anything gross." The voice came from Sage, who had walked up behind them without a sound. "You're up early, for you, at least," Emily noted as she turned around. Sage lifted a large travel mug, which Emily knew was full of coffee. "Don't I know it? Remember those murderous vibes I was feeling last night? I assume it's related to this mess." She waved airily in the direction of the crime scene, then yawned. "I woke up early with a feeling of urgency. The only two people I know who are up at such an hour are you and Trish. You're always the last person to hear the gossip, so I called Trish to ask what was going on and to tell her why I felt such urgency. She gave me the blow-by-blow account of her view from the bakery's front window." Emily's eyes lifted to the opposite side of the square, where a steady stream of people were going into and out of Grainy Day Bakery. Yes, Trish really had gotten a front row seat to the excitement. "If only Trish had heard a rumor about the whereabouts of my knife," Emily said wistfully, "and where my guests went last night." At Sage's and Trevor's questioning looks, she filled them in on Rebecca and Wyatt's late-night wandering. "Let's ask the murder victim, shall we?" Sage suggested. She lifted the bag she was carrying, which Emily knew held Sage's séance tools. "We won't be able to get into the crime scene, of course, but we can sit in the gazebo." The three of them had just reached the steps leading up into the gazebo when Detective Danny Hernandez strode up to them, a tired look on his face. "Of course you're all here," he said wryly. His brown eyes sparkled teasingly when he glanced at Emily and Sage, but they hardened slightly when they fell on Trevor. The two of them seemed to tolerate each other, but they definitely weren't what Emily would consider friends. "How long have you been out here?" Emily asked. Danny was dressed in khaki pants and a dark green polo shirt, but he looked slightly rumpled, and there was a grass stain on one knee of his pants. "We got the call shortly before 2 o'clock this morning. Someone cutting through the square on their way home from a Halloween party found the body." Danny was looking at Sage's coffee mug longingly. Which means, Emily thought, Rebecca or Wyatt could have done it during the hours they were gone. Their disappearance fits the timeline. Emily was about to relay that information when Danny spoke again. "We're about wrapped up here. If you were hoping to see something exciting, I'm afraid you're too late." Sage sniffed. "We didn't come here for the police show. We came for the ghost show." "Oh?" Danny quirked an eyebrow at Sage. "After I heard the news from Trish this morning, I figured I'd hop into the Grainy Day Bakery for a croissant and coffee." Sage paused, then hitched up one shoulder in a shrug. "Plus, I wanted to see what was going on. As soon as I left the bakery, I felt Joe's presence. He was floating over the pumpkin patch, wondering what in the world had happened to him." Danny nodded. "And so you three are here to help him figure that out." "That's the plan," Sage smiled. "But I might have a tip for you too," Emily began. She paused at the sound of a woman shouting somewhere nearby. A second woman answered, nearly as loudly as the first. "You wanted the ghost show?" Danny intoned. "But it looks like you're getting the ex-girlfriend show instead. Those two have been going at it for at least 30 minutes. "About what?" Emily asked. "It's too early in the day for so much drama." "Oh," Sage said, before Danny could answer. "One of those ladies is Bailey, the owner of Let's Play Dress Up. Ooh, she looks mad." "Sage, didn't you say she used to date Joe?" Emily asked. "Mm-hmm, and she told me he was a jerk, just like your guest said." "Who's the other woman?" "That would be Joe Carruthers' current girlfriend," Danny clarified, "or she was until he was murdered last night." The shouting match was beginning to rise in volume, but the women were too far away for Emily to hear exactly what was being said. What are they arguing about? The first woman Emily had heard shouting took a step toward Bailey, her hands curling into fists and her body tensing. Finally, she shouted loudly enough that Emily could understand every word. "I don't care what you heard. Don't point the finger at me when you're the one who killed him." And that's a wrap on chapter 5. So stay tuned for what happens next.